The White Rooms by Tim Bragg. Originally T.P. Bragg. The beginning. The catcher watched, narrowing his eyes and squinting out most of the dim light. There was enough credit riding on the fight to rouse his interest, much of that credit being his own. Those who sat near were aware of each of his movements. Nobody sat too close. Nobody talked with the catcher unless he spoke to them first. Alternately, scowling or smiling, the catcher waited for the white bodying to begin. None of them cared for the surrounding weak light or the slight smell of animal blood rising from the arena, though the idea that animals had once been slaughtered for food in that shadowy place stimulated them. Torches flamed against the building's walls and around the shaky seating. Electricity rarely penetrated that deep into the town. Sitting on wooden seats that curved around the centrally marked out area, faces glowed luminously in the eerie light. Credit, dob, money had been bet. Watchouts had been posted and waited in the dark outside. A growing light with its harsh scent of smoke heralded the approach of the stoners, the white bodies. The first fight of the night always carried the most and greatest bets. Pinch-faced boys scurried to collect the last of the dob. The catcher leant forward, his lean frame taut. The outcome of a fight was something he could never be absolutely sure of. Certainly he'd been well tipped off, but he could never get it 100%. That was the excitement. That was how he got his adrenaline to flow. Everything else he controlled, for that was the function of a catcher: to know, to control, to catch, and eventually, of course, to kill. The torchbearers entered through the doors at the western side of the cavernous building, then through a gap in the seating and into the arena. Following the flames were the stoners, their faces mute and rock-eyed. All those inside pressed forward, calculating sums in their heads. The catcher's eyes again narrowed perceptibly. Inside his right-hand pocket, he sheathed a bony hand. The stoners shone incandescently. Each body was guided to its place. The trainers spent their last moments repeating mantras. Mantras not to free the fighters' spirits, but to concentrate their earthly minds. The stoners' eyes barely flickered. Each carried the short sword and the hooked blade, as was the custom, though made illegal many years previously. Visibly, the catcher froze with excitement. Inside his pocket was the hidden, relentless shuffle of his hands' aging but slender fingers. Already the stoners' blood was beginning to slow. Catheters had been removed and their bodies plugged. Time was finite and close. Only the victor would survive. Time would be compressed, a comet flash in the glowing infinite darkness. The bell sounded. The white bodies lifted from their chairs next to the arena seats and began to walk clumsily towards each other as if their legs were already stiff. For years they had had to be trained to move their limbs as if the blood still ran freely. And for years the mantras had been drummed into them by their trainers. The whole process carried on for generations, illegally. Years for seconds and seconds for years. Many, many stoners shuttling down the illegal railroad. The stoners were naked, save for white bandanas wrapped around their white, bald skulls. Only a blue or red lightning stripe across the material marked them differently, and of course a tattooed blue turtle on the chest of the blue-marked one, and a red-coiled serpent around the torso of the other. In the dark light it was hard to distinguish between the bodies, yet all who watched and wagered big credit knew their man. Though their movements were often slow, the effects of their training produced unexpected and rapid swishing of the steel blades. A sharpened edge of a sword or the hooked side blade easily ripping open their chalky skin. The catcher had backed the serpent, but it was the turtle who severed the serpent's hand that carried the arced weapon. Tar blood gleamed dully and bloody dust fell like pepper to the floor. The congealed stickiness of the direct wound would unplug and lead to the draining of neo-blood, and though this new blood was pumped by a grisly heart, the lack of constant chemicals soon thickened it. The fighting continued. A gaping gash ran from the blue turtle's neck to his abdomen. It was almost as if the pain was felt. A flicker in the man's eye betrayed some deep sensation. Was it true that they could still feel pain? How could they feel the intense pain of those horrific wounds? The serpent slashed again and took off the turtle's nose as the turtle wielded the hooked blade into the red serpent's thigh. With his other arm, the turtle cut deep into the snake's side. Their limbs began to slow in motion and the cuts opened dryly. Terror appeared to flash in their eyes as flame torches were brought close to their white skin. And for all those who watched, it was as if the creatures themselves either coiled or withdrew into shell-like armour. The catcher looked on and was momentarily distracted from his sums as the terrified serpent widened its mouth. But the snake parried another lunge from the turtle with its handless arm. Though this arm was shortened still further, the serpent was able to maneuver its body in such a way that with the sword clutched in its good arm, it gathered enough speed to swoop through the air. The blue bandana tightened about the skull of the turtle, fluttered through the flamed darkness as the head was sliced clean from its neck. The serpent sank to its knees. Its job was done. There were 1,000 more reds waiting their turn. The fight had been the usual short affair. The crowd was happy. The shorter the fight, the quicker the payout. The red serpent would go to the white rooms. He would be spared the worst. Years for seconds, seconds for eternity. Although the catcher could never be sure of the outcome, he absolutely expected to win. The slow motion, the sudden swiftness of the fight, he found amusing. The tearing and renting of the flesh, without the thick juice of blood spurting, fascinating, though the diluted pale neo-blood might indeed flow. Credit would buy favours. From his pocket he brought out the body and legs of his spider, his wrath, his fingers carefully cupping the beast. For the catcher, there was work to be done. But first he would collect his winnings. Sniffing the air, which now had a different kind of animal blood charging it, he vacated his seat. Others glanced at him. The arena cleared and was swept, ready for the next of innumerable fights. Leaving the arena through the metal door reserved for his kind, the same markings in each temporary venue, the catcher turned briefly to see the next pair of white bodies slashing to the death. The catcher already knew the fate of the slain turtle's body. But the serpent's eyes would witness the signs to the white rooms. And had they not been told many times of this promised heaven? Wouldn't the victor dream of a life detached from the tubes and catheters of a stoner? A life far removed from the training and the cruelly short end. And yet both men's bodies would be eaten by the acid vats, an undeserved equality. The catcher felt little or no compassion, but as was his custom upon leaving, he dwelt upon the fate of the fighters and considered whose fate was superior or hellishly inferior. Would the mind of the victorious red serpent have time to measure and fully appreciate the terrible trick played upon him? The horror of the flesh-burning liquid perhaps reviving dormant brain cells one last magnificent time. The terrible truth that the white rooms were not in fact to be entered. Or would there be one last transcendental ecstasy of white pain? He hadn't time to bet more credit. As a catcher, he had to keep low. Higher authorities had interest in him. Breathing in the sulphurous air of the outside, the catcher reflected upon the real purpose of the white rooms, how they were kept solely for the children. It deserved the laugh which escaped his blood-infused lips. His right hand again played with the creature in his pocket. His other grasped the credits he had accrued.